Hello, beautiful souls. My name is Jessie, and welcome to my Tiny Talks podcast, the show where we'll dive into self-love, inner child healing, and discovering your soul's purpose. I look forward to chatting with you every single Tuesday and Thursday and helping you grow exponentially in all areas of your life. Without further ado, here's today's Tiny Talk. Hello, you guys, and welcome back to my Tiny Talks podcast. I am your host, Jessie Brown, and I am beyond thrilled to be here with you guys for another week where we are going to dive into self-love, inner child healing, and discovering your soul's purpose. I am so excited to jump into week 44 with you all, and today we are going to be diving into 7 skills to hopefully help you counter your overthinking or to improve your overthinking. We all, in some way, shape, or form, have experienced overthinking at some point in our life or another. And I know that some of us experience this more than others, and it can ebb and flow and come in waves. And I know that I've experienced this at certain times in my life, or if I'm going through something specific that's very stressful or whatever it is, but we've all experienced overthinking in some way, shape, or form at some point in our life. And so that's how I knew that this episode was going to be so powerful, because it's one of those things that we can all relate to, because it's something that we all do. But it's something that we all do on different levels and at different times and different severities, depending on where we're at with our mental health journey, depending where we're at in our healing journey, depending where we're at in our life with our stresses. Whatever it is that's going on for us, this can look different. But my hope and goal for today's episode is to give you guys some skills to help with that overthinking and to help slow down our minds so that we're able to be more present, more intentional, and to live in joy and flow and to just create more capacity and space to do the things that we love and that life is all about. And so I first just encourage you to ask yourself how much you find yourself overthinking. There's a reason that you clicked on this podcast in the first place. So I really want you to ask yourself that question of how much time do you think you're spending overthinking or in your head? And I guess just to give some context about what I mean by overthinking is just what it sounds like, being in your head about situations, playing things out that have already happened, playing things out that have yet to happen. And often we do this and we think of the worst case scenario, or there's a negative context that surrounds it. And I just want you to ask yourself, how often do you find yourself in that headspace? And maybe it's about your job, maybe it's about your relationship, maybe it's about your past, maybe it's about your future, maybe it's about money. Whatever it is, we all have areas of our life that we invest way too much of our brain power and energy thinking about it. And we often end up worrying about things, and more oftentimes than not, the situations often end up better than we anticipated. So just to kind of give an example, let's just imagine your manager sends you a text and says, "Can we talk?" Or your partner sends you a message, "Can we talk?" That instantly sends a message to your brain that something must be wrong, right? And then we start to catastrophize and we start to think, well, what did I do wrong? What did I maybe do wrong? What are they going to say? Am I still going to have a job? Am I still going to have a relationship? Well, then if that happens, then I'm not going to have an income, and then I'm not going to have a family. And right, we start to go down those rabbit holes, and it's so easy for us to do that. And that's something that we refer to as catastrophizing, which is basically a domino effect of thoughts, where we think of one thing and it trickles into another, which comes out to an outcome that usually isn't the outcome that is actually going to happen. And so as I was writing down my ideas for today's podcast, I really started to think of overthinking kind of like a cycle, which is really what it is, in that we have a thought or a cue that happens, which is going to trigger a response. And typically that response is worry, fear, anxiety, unsureness, uncomfortableness. Right? And when that happens and we don't have an outcome, our brain is left to worry, and it's left with gray area of so many thoughts that we can have. And then we typically just feel helpless, and we reminisce on that over and over and over again. And when we do this, not only are we pulling ourselves away from being in the present moment, but we're also kind of in a way manifesting the worst case scenario, because we're already kind of saying something bad has happened even before it's happened. And we often do this because our brain over time starts to pick up on cues in certain things and identifying it with a certain result. But more oftentimes than not, whenever we think something horrendous is going to happen, or we think the worst case scenario, it more oftentimes than not turns out better than we thought. And so my aim of today's podcast, again, is to just kind of give some skills so that we're able to honor that and hone back into our body, so that we're able to just get ourselves to that point that we're able to not think of the worst case. We're able to just sit in unsureness and just be okay with that uncomfortability. And again, this is a skill and this takes time. And this was actually happening to me a couple nights ago, where I was up till almost 4 a.m. because I was overthinking. And this is something that doesn't really happen to me very often, because I've implemented tools and practiced them for years and years to avoid this. But the other day I was just spiraling. And so it made me feel pulled to come on here and share, because I'm sure this is something that happens more frequently than we even realize it. And so before I dive into the 7 skills of overthinking, I kind of just wanted to quickly explain like the 4 types of ways that we can overthink. And so the first way that we can overthink is ruminating about the past, right? I wish I coulda, shoulda, coulda, woulda, right? I wish I could go back and change it. I wish I would have done that. I wish I would have said this, right? We start to think of all these things and we overthink about things that have already happened. They're already in the past and we don't have control of them. The second way that we can worry is worrying about the future. Again, how can I best prepare? What can I have control of? What am I going to do? What's this? What's that? Right? That domino effect of worrying about the future. The third way that we can overanalyze and overthink is to overanalyze decisions. I wish I would have done that. Well, maybe if I would have said that. Well, maybe at that point in my life, if I would have taken something different in university, maybe my life would look like this now. Or maybe if I didn't date that one person, maybe my life would be so much better now, right? We start to overanalyze so many decisions that we make, even though at the time of making those decisions, we did what we thought was best for us at that time, which in hindsight is what was best for us because it got you to where you are right now. And the fourth way that we overthink is social anxiety. So basically like the why did I say that? Why did I do that? Right? So it's that social anxiety when we get around people. And so the reason that I wanted to start off by covering the 4 types of overthinking is for you to maybe bring awareness of where you're spending most of your time overthinking. Because I think a lot of us operate differently. Some of us reminisce more on the past. Some of us reminisce more on the future. Some of us, it is about our decisions. Some of us, it is about social anxiety. So kind of figuring out where you are and where it is that you're spending a lot of your energy and your brain power. And that kind of leads me into my first skill to help us improve our overthinking. And that is to begin to notice and name it. And this is something that I probably say on almost all my podcast episodes when it comes to mental health. And that's when we're able to like notice something and name it. We're bringing awareness that it's happening in the first place. And awareness is the first step to make change, of identifying that we're doing it and making that shift. And when we're able to get good at identifying overthinking, we're able to tune into our brain and bring awareness that we're doing it in the first place. And so a huge way to even help with overthinking is to literally say out loud, I'm overthinking, I'm spiraling, I'm catastrophizing, I'm doing that thing again, right? When we're able to just say out loud and catch ourselves, we're able to bring awareness to our thoughts and pause them even for a second. And then going with the noticing and naming, beginning to notice triggers. When and where are you noticing yourself overthinking? Is it the same areas of your job that you're finding yourself overthinking? Is it the same stresses about the past and the future that you're overthinking about? Right? Is it about money that you're overthinking? Is it school? Is it your kids? Whatever it is, bringing awareness to what your triggers might be. Because when we're able to identify what our triggers are, we're able to predict it. We're able to predict that when I feel that way, when I do that thing, when I'm around that person, when this happens or that happens, I'm going to begin to overthink. And so when we're able to predict it, we're able to just give that validation for ourselves about what is about to happen. And I know what you might be thinking, like, Jesse, if I'm overthinking, how am I supposed to stop my thinking to do this? And I do just want to validate that absolutely, if you're having that thought, you are 100% right and accurate, because just like anything in the mental health world or healing or rewiring the brain, it takes time and it takes practice. And so one thing for me that I've mentioned before that has been beyond helpful is having sticky notes and setting alarms. So setting alarm on my phone every hour, every 2 hours, whatever best suits you, depending where you're at with this. And when that alarm goes off, knowing that that cue means to check in with yourself. Knowing that that means to slow down and bring awareness to your thoughts. And so maybe that for you is setting alarms. Maybe that's having sticky notes around your house or your work environment to check in. Maybe that's identifying that whenever you're at a red light in traffic, the red light means to stop, and so to check in with yourself. Right? It's all about finding what works for you. But in the beginning of this journey, it is important to have external factors that are helping us hone into this. Because if we are stuck in our head and we are stuck in our thoughts, it is really hard to bring awareness to it, especially in the beginning. So if you can begin to associate an action with an action or a cue with an action, we're able to bring awareness to it a little bit easier. And so once you're able to do that and you're able to catch yourself and notice those things, I definitely encourage you to begin to track it. Tracking it for a week, tracking when is it that you're spending the most time overthinking. Because the thing about our brain that's pretty cool is that it starts to associate those things with overthinking, but it's also able to do them in reverse. And that we're able to associate those sticky notes with stopping the overthinking. We're able to associate those alarms with checking in with ourselves. The same as often sometimes a lot of my old clients used to say, whenever I go to bed, my mind just starts to turn up and it won't stop reminiscing about the day and it won't shut off and I can't sleep. And so our brain slowly over time starts to associate going to bed with thinking. And so some helpful tips I had with that was to get out of bed and do something different. Go do something excruciatingly boring, like reading a microwave manual until you get so tired that you want to go to sleep. But when we're able to catch the areas that we spend the most time overthinking, that's when we're able to catch where the action and the trigger is starting and therefore able to pivot it. And one last point on this one, and I think that this is something that I can speak to a lot from experience and something that I know is very common, is that we often are very, very good at setting distractions without even realizing it, right? So we like to stay busy, we like to be doing things because when we sit still and we're silent, and I think that that's why meditation can be really, really challenging in the beginning, is because when we're not doing anything or we don't have distractions, that is when our mind starts to go and we start to go in our head. And so when we're able to notice when we're doing that, we're able to identify when it is that that spirals. Because if we're sitting still and we're having all these thoughts and we're overthinking, our instinct is to get up and to start to do something else. And I've chatted a lot about how suppressing our emotions and suppressing those things really can just make it increase and make it worse. And so as I continue to dive into these skills, that is largely an area that I want you to bring awareness to, is if when you're sitting still in your home by yourself, is that when you're spending the most time overthinking? Because I know for me, that's when my thoughts begin to spiral. And so I wanted to share that point before I dive into the rest of the skills for you guys, because I do think that that is a large area in which people do begin to overthink. So my second skill for beginning to conquer overthinking is to postpone or to schedule time to ruminate and to think and to let your mind spiral. And so when we're able to actually set a time for our mind to do that, when we begin to notice, and again, that takes time, but when we begin to notice that we're doing that, we're able to say to our brain, I already scheduled my time to be at 2 p.m. every day to let my mind spiral. So I don't have to worry about this right now because I know I have time allocated later to tend to that. And this was one that was extremely helpful for me. And I've got a lot of great feedback from my clients of expressing this one thing of just, why don't you schedule time to do that? Right? We schedule time to do so many other things, but why don't we schedule time to allow our brain time to just dump and just go through the motions? right? Having that awareness of, I get to worry about this later, putting it on the calendar. And then when that time comes, when it's time to worry, I always say that it's better to get it out on paper than to leave it in your mind. Because when we're able to get it out of our body through expression of words and just physically getting out of us, it helps to decrease that energy a lot more. Because when we're just sitting there spiraling, going through our thoughts, it's more oftentimes than not that those are just going to stick there and they're just going to keep spiraling. But if we're able to actually get them out of our body and onto paper, not only are we getting the energy out, but we're also seeing blankly in front of us the areas of which are causing us to spiral and overthink. So we're able to bring more awareness to it. And so that is my second skill. Set time, allocate time to worry. Because we're all allowed to overthink. We have the permission to do that, and that's a normal human thing to do. But when it begins to take over our life and over our other actions, and we're spending way too much time overthinking, that's when we can begin to feel anxious, overwhelmed, unsure, pushing things aside, feeling tired, all those things. And so that is a tip that has helped me so much. I have seen help a lot of people, and I definitely encourage you to try that. My third skill for you guys to be able to conquer overthinking is to begin to shift your attention. So attention shifting. And so I've said again multiple times on my podcast that we have thousands of thoughts a day. Thousands and thousands and thousands of thoughts a day. So much so that we don't even realize half the thoughts that we're having, because it's just our mind's way of communicating with itself all the time to keep us safe, to look out for threats, to focus on if we're hungry, focus on if we're tired, focus on what our needs are, right? We have a lot of thoughts. And a lot of our thoughts are true, but a lot of our thoughts are false. And it's those false thoughts and those negative thoughts that really begin to cause us to spiral. Because those good ones, our brain feels good about. We can let them rest, we can let them digest, they're fine. But it's those ones that cause us to stir up or cause us anxiety or overwhelming that begin that overthinking. And so when we're able to shift our attention and shift what we're thinking about, we're able to rewire the brain to view things differently. And so again, the other day when I was spiraling, I literally had a visual in my mind of like all these switches, and all those switches were all the thoughts that I was having. And just in my mind, I went up to all of them and I just turned them all off, right? I was physically switching them off in my brain. They weren't serving me anymore. And I was able to shift my attention somewhere else. And so a huge way that we can do this is beginning to shift what you have control over and what you don't have control over. Because if you're able to look at the things that you're overthinking about, how many of the things do you actually have control of? Because even that example that I gave earlier about your relationship or about your boss, you don't know what it is that your boss is going to say. But you do have control over knowing what it is that you've done, checking to make sure that you've, crossed all your T's and dotted all your I's, making sure that you're showing up. If it's your relationship, making sure that you're checking in, maybe sending a follow-up. Hey, just checking in regarding what this is about. Focusing on what it is that you have control over. Because when we're able to do that and we're able to turn those thoughts off quicker, we're able to catch ourselves. And another helpful thing for shifting your attention is finding gratitude. And I know that that can seem so simple, but when we're able to find gratitude for even the fact that we're having these thoughts in the first place, because if we're having the thoughts in the first place, it means that a part of us cares about something, right? I always say, just like anything with mental health, it's about our mindset of how we view things across the board in life. Because if we're just reminiscing and viewing everything as negative, everything is going to appear and feel negative. But if we're able to find gratitude and shift our attention to that gratitude about that we're even having those thoughts in the first place, it means that we care. And so that is my third tip for you guys, is to try to shift your attention. Try to shift it the way that you're viewing it, the way that you're feeling about it, which I know can take time and can be easier said than done sometimes. And that's like all of these. But with practice and with doing it slowly, one thought at a time, you'll be amazed at how much over time your mind will just slowly begin to shift its perception and thoughts of things. My fourth point for you guys, which goes pretty hand in hand with attention shifting, which is shifting from negative thoughts to the present moment. Because oftentimes when we're spiraling or we're in our head, we're not really in our body in the present moment. And typically when this happens, we almost go into a mild or severe dissociative state where we're not really in our body. We're really in our head and we're not really noticing the things around us. And one of the easiest ways to shift into the present moment is through our sense of smell. And that is why I am extremely passionate and love essential oils, and why I'm a brand representative for Young Living, because I am so passionate about natural living and ditching toxins, but also just about essential oils and what they can do for our mind. And so our sense of smell, so smelling oils in your hand, or maybe you love the smell of chocolate chip cookies, or you love the smell of something in your house, right? Having a sense of smell is one of the quickest ways that we can bring our mind back online, back into the present moment. But when we're able to shift from negative thoughts to the present moment, we're able to come back to reality and turn our thinking brain back online. Because oftentimes when we're overthinking and we're in our head, our logic brain isn't even online. We're acting out of impulse, out of anxiety, out of survival. And when we do that, our heart's beating faster, right? That's when our adrenaline goes up and our anxiety starts to kick in. And so the end of my podcast, I always say, get out of your head and into your heart. For this point, I encourage you to get out of your head and into your body. Noticing your 5 senses. What can you smell? What can you touch? What can you hear? What can you taste? What can you see? That is one of the best practices for beginning to get in your body, because we often dissociate and go out of our body and into our mind based on a cue, something that has triggered us. And it's typically one of our 5 senses that triggers us into that state, but it's also our 5 senses that can trigger us out of that. So what can you begin to notice? What are your surroundings? What are 5 things that you can see? 3 things that you can hear, right? Going through those grounding techniques. Grounding techniques are huge for beginning to shift overthinking and coming back to your body. And again, I do just want to preface that this takes time and this takes practice. And as with all of these points, if any of these feel too overwhelming to do, or you just feel unsafe coming back to your body, I definitely encourage you to seek professional help, as always, to get that proper support, and knowing that you're so worthy to go to therapy, to go see a mental health professional, and to get help. I spent so many years of my life in therapy, and I'm so glad that I did, and it's an ongoing process. That was one of the main reasons why I started my podcast in the beginning, because there's just so much stigma that is tied to mental health and mental illness and seeking therapy and getting help. But at the end of the day, if we're able to focus on that and put in the work and retrain our brain, we're setting our future self up for success, instead of having that stigma that really doesn't exist for any reason other than, I think, the coverage of shame that comes over us when we experience any kind of mental health or mental illness things in our life. And so if you're finding it hard to come back to your body and come back to the present moment in a safe way, I definitely encourage you to speak to somebody about that. But so that is my 4th point of beginning to catch overthinking, is to shift your negative thoughts to the present moment. Coming back to your space, coming back to things that make you feel safe and in your body. My 5th point that I have for you guys, and 5th skill, is to begin to shift your thinking from abstract thinking to concrete thinking. And basically an example of abstract thinking is, why am I a failure? Why is everyone around me ahead of me? Why can't I just do this? Why can't I find friends? Why am I not smart enough? Why am I so depressed? Why am I stuck? And I normally love why questions, but specifically when they're in a way that you're digging in a positive light to find an answer. But when we just begin to ask why blank something we lack, none of those questions that we ask ourselves lead to an action. Because when we ask ourselves those questions, they're very negative and very negative context. And an abstract thinking is just that, right? It's that broad thinking that really doesn't lead to an action. And so instead, I encourage you to have more concrete thinking and asking yourself the right kinds of questions. So for example, instead of saying, why am I so depressed? Asking yourself, what is one small thing I can do today to better my mental health? Right? There's an action there. There's something that you're actually able to do tangibly. Because even just asking that question, why am I depressed? Think of how many things that is going to firework and trigger off in our brain. One thought's going to lead to the next, lead to the next, lead to the next. But if we ask ourselves, what is one small thing we can do? We actually have an action and a thing that we have to do. And so I encourage you to begin to practice small steps. How can I do one thing that's going to shift that? What's one thing that I can do better today than I did yesterday? How's one way that I can shift my thinking today more than yesterday? What's one small time that I can set aside to be more in my body? Right? Asking more of those concrete questions, because those abstract thinking questions are really what shoot us off on our catastrophizing and on our overthinking. And so bringing awareness to those questions and that awareness that you're asking yourself. And I do just want to preface that I do think that a lot of this does come from having a lack of self-love and a lack of self-belief, because I used to have so much of that thinking and I just felt so stuck in my body and frustrated. But when I was able to just notice that I was doing that and bring awareness to it and do small steps over time and actually follow through with that action, as I was doing that and following through, without even realizing it, I was building my self-love, building my self-worth, which really is at the end of the day one of the best things that we can do. And I have an episode coming out later this month about just that, of how to raise our self-worth and why self-worth is so important. But that is my 5th point, which is to begin to shift your thinking from abstract thinking to concrete thinking. Number 6, this is one that I absolutely love, which is to begin to shift your values. Because when we begin to focus on overthinking, it's not going to stop it. It's almost like if I told you right now not to think of a pink panda. You're all thinking of a pink panda, right? When we start to, think and say, I'm overthinking, oh my gosh, I'm overthinking. We begin to just overthink more and more and more, and it keeps going. And so before we can start to change overthinking, we have to begin to think about what we want in our life. What do we want that to look like? Where is it that we're going? Right? Creating that direction. Because instead of distracting ourselves, we need to think of what you really care about. What are your values? What are you striving for? Why is overthinking pulling you backwards instead of pushing you forward? When we're able to bring awareness to those things, we're able to then shift our perception when we're overthinking to point it to a value and a core belief or something that we want to accomplish, instead of just the simple point of wanting to end the overthinking. And so this point is really just about using your energy that you're having more efficiently. So for example, instead of the overthinking aspect, maybe asking yourself what you want more of. Maybe it's being more present in your life. Maybe it's living a more meaningful life. Maybe it's spending more time with your kids, right? When we're able to bring awareness to those things and just identify what our values are and the outcomes that we want, we're able to recognize why we're doing it in the first place and something to hold on to. And my last point for you all is distraction. And I know that this is kind of counterintuitive to what I was saying earlier, but just stay with me for a moment. I do think that it is okay to have lumps of time that we have distractions, right? But if we're just spending hours watching Netflix or scrolling on TikTok or scrolling on social media, when we're then done with that, we're coming back to life feeling very unfulfilled. And so when we're beginning to create that cycle and that habit of avoiding life, we're also avoiding what we really care about. And so one thing that's really helpful is creating distractions that bring meaning to your life. And so maybe that's gardening, maybe that's walking your dog, maybe that's playing with your children. Finding healthy distractions, things that allow you to be in the present moment, that allow you to be happy and to focus on your values, but also allow time to have those distractions and have that time to allow your mind to turn off for a bit. Because it is okay to take time to rest and allow your mind to relax. But when we're spending too much time hyper-focused with the intention of doing those things to turn off our thoughts, that's when we begin to get in that negative headspace and that negative cycle. And again, as I mentioned earlier, get help if this is something that you're really struggling with. Because just like any habit, it takes work and it takes consistency. But it takes bringing awareness to it and knowing that you're so worthy and also capable of doing it. We often think that we don't have the capacity or the willpower or the potential or the skills or the tools to do these things. And so if you are someone who spends so much time overthinking to the point that you don't even know what to do anymore and none of these skills are working, I definitely encourage you to seek professional help and go down that route and see where that might take you. I truly, truly hope from the bottom of my heart that these 7 skills, or at least one of them, 2 of them, whatever it is, help you find some relief in your mind. Because our mind is so powerful and it has so much potential to elevate our life. And it can be so easy for us to get caught up in overthinking and caught up in our thoughts. And know that that is a natural and normal thing to do. But when our mind begins to overthink so much that we're not able to be present, we're not able to find joy or happiness because we're just so in our mind, that is the point that we know that we need to intervene and do something. Because we have the capacity, we have it within us. It is about bringing awareness to it and putting one foot in front of the other to begin to do the actions and the things to get there. I want to thank you guys so much as always for tuning into this week's episode of Tiny Talks for episode number 44. I cannot wait to chat with you all next week and I look forward to then. Bye you guys. Thank you all so much for tuning into this week's episode of Tiny Talks. I absolutely love connecting with you all, so make sure you're following me on Instagram. I am at JessieBrown13. If you enjoyed today's episode, please feel free to leave a review or share with someone you think would enjoy. I look forward to chatting with you all next week. And remember, get out of your head and into your heart.